Have you ever noticed how some government places are widely known, officially acknowledged, and yet still strangely hard to fully understand? It's a curious phenomenon, isn't it? We might know the name, the general location, perhaps even a sliver of its stated purpose. But the deeper institutional journey, the intricate processes of its very existence within official frameworks, often remain veiled. We see the edifice, so to speak, but the blueprints and the construction log are far less accessible. Today, we're going to slowly unpack one of the most publicly acknowledged facilities in the United States, and yet one that remains procedurally difficult to follow, even after decades of public discussion and incremental official disclosures. We will explore the institutional life of a location that has transitioned from complete official denial to a measured, partial acknowledgement, tracing the evolution of its public narrative through governmental actions, legal necessities, and the eventual, though always limited, release of documents. Our focus will be on the process of its classification, the mechanisms of its acknowledgement, and the pathways through which information, or the lack thereof, has flowed to the public. For many years, this specific facility, situated in a remote corner of the Nevada desert, existed largely as an unnamed entity in the public consciousness, a site whispered about rather than officially designated. Its existence, while widely speculated upon, was consistently met with official silence or indirect, non-committal responses from government channels. Local residents, aviators, and those who simply looked up at the sky near Groom Lake reported unusual aerial phenomena and restricted airspace activities. These observations sparked a nascent public curiosity, but there was no official designation, no entry on public maps, and no direct governmental reference to a specific operating location that could explain these reports. The procedural void was considerable, yet the circumstantial evidence of something happening there continued to mount. The initial public awareness of this unacknowledged site began to coalesce around the mid-20th century, specifically during the Cold War era. It was a time marked by intense technological competition and a heightened need for the development of advanced aerial surveillance capabilities. As high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft, like the Humanist II, began their test flights, they inevitably generated observations from individuals in the vicinity. These observations, often unexplained in official terms, contributed to the growing public fascination and suspicion regarding the barren Nevada landscape. The government's official stance at the time was characterized by an almost complete absence of information regarding the specific location, creating a fertile ground for informal speculation to take root. The institutional process of managing such a sensitive project demanded operational security, which translated into public denial of the facility itself. Over time, the informal designation, Area 51, began to circulate in public discourse, a name that originated from older Atomic Energy Commission map designations. Despite its growing prevalence in popular culture and media, the United States government continued its policy of official non-acknowledgement. This prolonged period of institutional silence was not a mere oversight. It was a deliberate operational posture, a procedural decision rooted in the perceived national security imperatives of its classified programs. Maps published by the U.S. Geological Survey and other official agencies simply depicted the area as part of the vast Nellis Air Force Range, without any specific mention of a specialized facility at Groom Lake. The institutional boundary between classified operations and public knowledge was firmly drawn through denial. A significant shift in this official posture, however, began to emerge not from proactive disclosure, but from legal and regulatory necessities. The existence of the facility was inadvertently, yet officially, acknowledged through environmental litigation in the 1990s. Former contractors and employees initiated lawsuits against the Air Force and the Environmental Protection Agency, alleging health issues stemming from waste disposal practices at the site. These legal proceedings required the government to address the location of the alleged activities, even if its specific programmatic details remained highly classified. It was within these court documents that the phrase, operating location near Groom Lake, appeared, marking a subtle but crucial procedural step away from outright denial. The legal framework, designed for transparency in other domains, forced a crack in the wall of non-acknowledgement. This was a complex moment in the institutional journey of the facility. The U.S. Supreme Court, in a 1995 ruling, issued an exemption to environmental disclosure laws for the operating location near Groom Lake. citing national security concerns. While this ruling preserved the confidentiality of specific operations, the fact of an operating location there was now enshrined in a Supreme Court decision. This legal acknowledgment, while carefully worded to avoid revealing operational specifics, represented a foundational shift. The facility, which had been procedurally invisible, was now legally present, albeit under a broad, nondescript label. The government wasn't explaining what was happening there, but it was conceding that something existed that required extraordinary legal protection. Further clarity, albeit still fragmented, arrived much later in the 21st century. In 2013, the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, declassified documents detailing the history of the Humanist II surveillance program. These documents, released in response to a public records request, contained explicit references to Area 51 and confirmed its primary purpose as a test site for advanced aircraft during the Cold War. This marked another pivotal procedural milestone. For the first time, an official government agency explicitly used the well-known public moniker, Area 51, and openly stated its historical function. It was a formal acknowledgement, decades after public speculation began, solidifying the transition from an unacknowledged operating location to a historically validated, if still functionally opaque, government facility. The declassification, however, was a retrospective act, clarifying historical uses rather than providing current operational transparency. The documents explained that the site was chosen for its remoteness, its dry lakebed for landings, and its secure perimeter, all ideal conditions for testing secret aircraft away from prying eyes. This narrative aligned with the strategic necessities of the Cold War and the development of high-altitude reconnaissance. Yet, even with this explicit historical confirmation, the nature of ongoing activities, the complete scope of past projects beyond the Humanist II, and the full timeline of its operational history remained, by and large, unaddressed in publicly accessible records. The classification boundary had shifted for the past, but remained firm for the present and many specifics of that past. The process of declassification itself is generally governed by specific executive orders and regulations, balancing national security against public interest and historical transparency. Documents are often reviewed for specific classifications like top secret, secret, or confidential, and assigned declassification dates or conditions. For Area 51, the declassification of the Humanist II program's history revealed that the facility existed and what its initial purpose was. However, it did not declassify all documents related to the site, nor did it offer a comprehensive public history of every project conducted there. The releases were specific, targeted, and limited in scope, leaving many procedural gaps for those attempting to reconstruct a full institutional timeline. The public learned a truth, but not necessarily the whole truth of its long and varied governmental life. The careful framing of these acknowledgments is itself a procedural artifact. From unidentified operating location to operating location near Groom Lake to the eventual explicit Area 51 within historical context, the language used by official channels has evolved slowly and deliberately. Each linguistic shift represented a change in institutional posture, often compelled by external pressures rather than internal impetus for full transparency. The term, Area 51, moved from a public nickname to an officially recognized historical designation for a specific period of activity. This evolution highlights the granular, often painstaking nature of declassification, where terminology itself becomes a subject of careful deliberation and strategic release. Even following these declassifications, many procedural questions persist. For instance, while the Humanist II program and later the Humanist 12 OXCART program were confirmed to have operated from the facility, the full administrative and operational history, the precise chain of command over decades, and the detailed budgetary allocations remain largely unarticulated in public documents. The public has been provided with a historical context for why the facility was initially established and for some of the projects conducted there. However, the comprehensive institutional records that would fully detail its life cycle, its full list of missions, the various agencies involved over time, and the eventual winding down or modification of its initial purposes, have not been made available in an integrated, transparent manner. What we are left with is a mosaic of information, pieced together from various sources. Legal documents, selective historical declassifications, and indirect official statements. This fragmented record makes it challenging to trace the complete procedural journey of Area 51, from its initial conception as a highly classified testing ground through its various transformations over more than half a century. The official acknowledgment has provided a foundation, confirming its existence and certain historical uses, but it has not resolved the institutional opaqueness that surrounds its complete operational chronology or its broader role within the governmental apparatus across different eras. The lingering questions are not about fantastical speculation, but about the intricate administrative and operational pathways that govern such long-running classified facilities. How did classification levels evolve over time for this particular site? What specific regulatory changes or executive directives influenced its management? How do the various branches of government coordinate oversight for such a persistent, yet partially unacknowledged, entity? These are the procedural details that remain largely unwritten in the public record, leaving the institutional story of Area 51 incomplete, even as its name is now widely known. The journey from complete denial to partial, historical acknowledgement has been long, but the full, procedural narrative continues to unfold, slowly in glimpses, often leaving as many questions